The first time General Adrian Vale called me useless, I was holding the order that would have sent 83 soldiers into a valley the enemy had already mined. "Stop correcting my orders," he said, loud enough for the entire command room to hear. The map table went silent. Officers who had been arguing over fuel numbers and weather windows suddenly found reasons to study their screens. I kept my hand on the page between us, one finger resting beside the route designation I had circled in red. "Sir, Recon Team 4 reported movement here 6 hours ago." Bill didn't look at the report. He looked at me. That was worse. An intelligence cleared the route 40 minutes ago, using satellite data taken before Recon 4 made contact. His jaw tightened. I knew that expression. I had seen it every time I caught something after he had already made up his mind. "Lieutenant, your job is to process my orders, not rewrite them." I should have stopped there. For 3 years, I had learned exactly how much correction he would tolerate before pride became more important than precision. Usually, I changed a coordinate quietly, flagged a timing conflict, attached a forgotten field report, and let the final order arrive on his desk looking as if it had been perfect from the beginning. He never asked who caught the mistakes. I never told him. Somewhere along the way, I had convinced myself that doing the work correctly mattered more than being seen doing it. "The eastern approach gives them cover," I said. "If the reconnaissance report is accurate, the southern route is compromised." Vale pulled the paper out from under my hand. My red circle disappeared beneath his glove. "Do you know why everyone else in this room manages to follow instructions?" His voice stayed calm. That made the humiliation sharper. "Because they understand the chain of command." A few heads lowered. Nobody spoke. "You," he continued, "turn every simple order into an argument. You question timing. You question intelligence. You question officers with 10 times your experience." He placed the page flat on the table. "And half the time, you delay execution fixing things that were never broken." Something old and familiar tightened behind my ribs. Not anger exactly. Recognition. My father had used different words when I was 17, after I spent an entire night repairing the bookkeeping error that almost cost his business a contract. "Stop making yourself important." My first captain had said I was obsessive when I caught a supply discrepancy everyone else missed. Vale had simply found the cleanest word for all of it. "Useless." "Understood, General," I said. He seemed almost disappointed that I didn't fight back. "Good. Then process the order exactly as written." "Exactly as written." I looked down again. Route 7. Departure at 0430. Armored convoy through the southern pass. Recon 4's warning sat 3 documents beneath the order, stamped received, but not integrated into the final intelligence summary. There was also a second problem. The fuel schedule assumed the engineering vehicles would leave 30 minutes earlier than the infantry carriers, but Vale's latest timing revision had synchronized them. That meant the convoy would enter the narrowest part of the pass as one long column, instead of 3 separated groups. I had already marked the correction in red. Move engineering departure to 0400. Reroute 2nd Company east if Recon 4 confirmed metallic signatures. It would have taken me 20 seconds to make the changes. Instead, I picked up my pen and crossed out my own notes. Vale's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" "Following your order, sir." I removed the red correction slip, folded it once, and put it in my pocket. Then I stamped the page approved for transmission. A communications officer glanced at me. He had seen me stop bad orders before. His expression asked a question he was too smart to say aloud. "Are you sure?" I handed him the packet. "Send it." Vale returned to the map without another word. For the first time in 3 years, one of his orders left command exactly the way he had written it. I expected satisfaction. Instead, I felt a cold pressure settle in my stomach as the transmission confirmation blinked green. 2:18. The convoy had 2 hours and 12 minutes before departure. I could still fix it. I could walk to communications, add Recon 4's report, change the timing, and no one would ever know. That was how it always worked. Vale gave the command. I caught the edges. The mission succeeded. He received another citation for decisive leadership, and I went back to my desk with red ink on my fingers. My hand moved toward the correction slip in my pocket. Then Vale spoke behind me. "Lieutenant." I turned. "Yes, sir." I meant what I said. His gaze dropped briefly to the pocket where the folded paper rested. "No more corrections unless I request them." There it was. Not a misunderstanding. Not heat from an argument. A direct order. Something inside me went strangely still. "Understood." At 3:07, Recon 4 sent another message. This one wasn't buried in a routine field report. It arrived marked priority. Metallic anomalies confirmed along the southern pass. Possible buried charges. The duty officer read it twice, swore under his breath, and carried it straight to intelligence. I watched from my station as the room changed. Conversations shortened. Screens filled with terrain scans. Vale came out of the planning chamber and demanded an assessment. Intelligence told him they needed confirmation. The convoy departure remained unchanged. I had the correction slip in my pocket. The answer was already written on it. For 3 years, this was the moment when I would have stepped forward. I didn't. At 3:41, another officer asked why the engineering group and infantry were scheduled to enter the pass together. Vale turned toward operations. Operations turned toward me. Every face in the room seemed to remember at once who normally caught timing conflicts before they reached this stage. Vale's eyes met mine across the table. For 1 second, I thought he was going to ask. Instead, pride won. The schedule stands. At 4:30, the convoy rolled out. At 4:52, the first status report came back clean. Someone near me exhaled in relief. Vale didn't look at me, but I saw the slight lift of his chin. Maybe he thought that proved him right. At 5:03, the communications console screamed. Not beeped. Screamed. One channel lit red, then 3 more. Convoy actual to command. We have an obstruction at checkpoint Delta. Static swallowed the next words. Then another voice cut through, panicked and fast. Engineering vehicle disabled. Possible detonation. Southern pass is blocked. The room froze. Vale was beside communications before anyone else moved. Casualties? Unknown. Enemy contact? Unknown. Another transmission cracked over the speakers. Second company is trapped behind the lead vehicles. We can't turn the carriers in this corridor. I closed my eyes for half a second. That was the timing problem. The one I had crossed out. Vale slowly looked toward me. This time there was no irritation in his face. No contempt. Just the first flicker of something I had never seen there before. Uncertainty. His gaze dropped to my pocket. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, "what did you change?" I could have answered immediately. Instead, I pulled out the folded correction slip and placed it on the table between us. 2 red notes. 2 problems. Both written before he called me useless. Before he ordered me to stop. Vale unfolded the paper. The color drained from his face. Then communications shouted again. "General, we just lost contact with the lead vehicle." And for the first time since I had entered his command, Adrian Vale looked at one of his own orders as if he was afraid of what else I might have already seen. "Get me the convoy's last position," Vale ordered, but the answer that came back was worse than silence. The lead engineering vehicle had triggered a buried charge at checkpoint Delta, exactly where Recon 4 had flagged metallic anomalies, and the blast had collapsed enough rock into the pass to trap the carriers behind it. No confirmed deaths yet. 3 injuries. 1 vehicle disabled. Communications intermittent. Then operations pulled up the convoy feed and found the second problem. "General, the recovery team can't reach the lead vehicle." Vale turned. "Why not?" The officer enlarged the route display. Every convoy marker sat compressed into the same narrow corridor. Engineering, infantry, fuel, medical support. No separation between them. They all departed on the revised schedule. Nobody looked at me this time. They didn't have to. Vale still held my correction slip. Move engineering departure to 0400. Separate convoy elements before entering the southern pass. 2 lines of red ink that had seemed useless 90 minutes ago. Options, Vale said. The room moved again. Officers called alternate routes, checked drone coverage, demanded updated terrain scans. I stayed at my station because that was what he had ordered me to do. Process. Don't interfere. Intelligence finally confirmed the eastern approach was still open, but redirecting the trapped convoy wasn't simple. The lead carriers couldn't reverse without clearing the vehicles behind them first. "We can send recovery units from the north," operations said. 45 minutes. "Too long," Vale replied. "Then we move second company through the service cut." I looked up. The service cut was barely marked on the tactical map, a maintenance road running along the western ridge. On paper, it shortened the extraction by 12 minutes. On the latest terrain report, it crossed ground softened by 3 days of rain. I knew because I had flagged that report the night before when an engineering estimate contradicted the route database. My pen was already in my hand before I realized it. I stopped. Vale noticed. His eyes moved from my pen to my face. Something. Every officer close enough to hear went still. It was the first time he had asked me that question. Not kindly, not with trust, but he had asked. The Western Service cut may not support armored carriers. May not. Engineering submitted a soil load warning at 2200. Operations searched the system. I don't have that in the route packet. Because it was filed under infrastructure maintenance, not tactical movement. Vale stared at me. How do you know that? I read it. The answer seemed to irritate him more than it should have. Maybe because it was too simple. Why wasn't it attached to the route packet? That wasn't my assignment. His expression hardened. Since when has that stopped you? There it was. Not an apology. An accusation disguised as a question. I felt the old instinct rise again. To explain, to fix the tone, to make the answer easier for him to accept. I killed it. Since you ordered me to stop correcting things I wasn't assigned to correct. Before Vale could respond, communications cut across us. Convoy actual reports movement on the southern ridge. Unknown personnel, approximately 6. The room changed instantly. The blocked convoy was no longer dealing with an accident. Someone might be watching them. Vale pointed at operations. Get aerial confirmation. Do not use the western cut until engineering clears it. That was new. 20 minutes earlier, he would have issued the movement order first and expected the details to catch up. Now he had paused because of something I said. It should have felt like victory. Instead, the trapped convoy icons kept blinking on the screen. At 5:17, the drone feed came online. 6 heat signatures became 9. Then 12. They were moving along the ridge toward a position overlooking the disabled engineering vehicle. Hostile? Vale asked. No weapons confirmation. They're using the terrain to stay off the road. Intelligence said. Could be civilians. I leaned closer to the display. Something bothered me about their spacing. Not the people. The route. They were avoiding 3 sections of open ground for no obvious reason. Pull up Recon 4's original report, I said. Operations hesitated. Technically, I had no authority to request anything from him. Vale looked at me for one long second. Do it. The report appeared. I compared the metallic anomaly coordinates to the drone track. The heat signatures were walking around them. They know where the charges are. Nobody spoke. Vale stepped closer. You're certain? No, I pointed to the screen. But they crossed open ground twice to avoid these 3 points. Those are the same locations Recon 4 flagged before your order went out. The implication landed harder than the first explosion. The buried charge might not have been an old mine. Someone could have placed it deliberately. And whoever was on that ridge might be waiting for the convoy to do exactly what Vale had just considered doing. Move on to the only obvious alternate path. Engineering report on the western cut. Vale snapped. An officer answered almost immediately. Load risk confirmed. Heavy carriers could bog down near kilometer 4. Vale swore under his breath. If he had ordered the reroute without asking me, second company could have become immobilized on exposed ground while unknown observers watched from above. The first error had created a trap. His first instinct for correcting it had nearly created another. This time, Vale didn't look angry when he turned to me. He looked careful. What else? 2 words. Nothing more. But the balance in the room shifted. An hour ago, my corrections had been interference. Now the Alpha General was asking what he had missed. I opened the route database, then the intelligence packet, then the logistics schedule. Give me 5 minutes. You have 3. That almost sounded like the old Vale, and strangely, I preferred it. Pressure I could work with. Contempt was harder. I started cross-checking timestamps. Within 90 seconds, I found a mismatch. The reconnaissance update had reached command at 1:46. Vale's final route authorization had been signed at 1:58, but the intelligence summary attached to his order carried a compilation timestamp of 1:31. The document was 17 minutes older than the warning it supposedly incorporated. General, I turned the screen toward him. Your intelligence clearance never included Recon 4's report. His eyes narrowed. Then why was it marked current? I don't know. That was the first answer all morning that frightened me. Vale ordered an audit of the packet history. Communications kept working the convoy. The unknown figures on the ridge disappeared from drone view one by one. At 5:29, the recovery team reached the northern entrance and began extracting the injured. The immediate crisis was stabilizing, but the command room had stopped treating the explosion as a single bad decision. 10 minutes later, the audit returned. The intelligence packet had been compiled correctly. Recon 4's warning had arrived afterward. Nothing had been falsified. No sabotage. No conspiracy. Just timing. A report entered the system 12 minutes too late to reach the summary, and normally someone caught gaps like that before an order left the room. Me. Vale looked at the red correction slip again. How often does this happen, he asked. Reports arriving after compilation? You catching something after the packet is supposedly complete. I didn't know the number. I had never counted because I had never thought of it as exceptional. It was simply the work that appeared between assignments, the contradiction no one owned, the timestamp that didn't line up. Often enough. Vale's expression changed. Define often. Before I could answer, operations called from the archive terminal. General, you need to see this. He had searched previous route packets for late intelligence editions. The screen showed a list. Not one mission. Not 5. 27 operations in the last 14 months contained amendments entered after Vale's initial authorization. Vale stepped toward the terminal. Who approved the amendments? The officer swallowed. Most of them don't have a separate approval signature. They were incorporated during final processing. Vale went very still. I already knew what he was going to ask before he turned toward me. Were those yours? I looked at the dates. I remembered the red ink, the mismatched weather report, the fuel calculation, the bridge restriction, the patrol schedule that put 2 units on the same road. Corrections so routine I had forgotten most of them as soon as they were fixed. Some of them, I said. Operations opened the first archived order. My initials were at the bottom. Then the second. Mine again. The third had no initials, but the amendment language was familiar enough that I recognized it instantly. Vale stared at the growing list while the recovered convoy reported 3 wounded and no fatalities. We had been lucky, but luck was no longer the question sitting in that command room. The question was why General Adrian Vale's orders had almost never suffered this kind of failure before I stopped correcting them, and how many of the victories attached to his name had passed through my red pen first. By 6:10, General Vale had stopped asking whether I had altered his orders and started asking why no one had noticed that I was doing it. The answer arrived in the form of 27 archived operations spread across 3 monitors. Operations had separated each original authorization from the version that actually reached the field. On the first mission, I had changed a fuel stop after a bridge restriction came in late. On the 4th, I had moved a patrol window because 2 units had been assigned the same road. On the 9th, I had attached a weather update that forced an air team to delay by 19 minutes. None of those changes looked dramatic by themselves. Together, they formed a pattern. Pull the outcome reports, Vale said. Major Keller from operations hesitated. For all 27. All of them. That was the first real change I noticed in him. An hour earlier, Vale had dismissed information that challenged an order he had already signed. Now he was actively searching for information that might challenge his own record. Keller loaded the outcomes. 24 operations had been rated successful. 2 had ended with minor delays. 1 had been aborted before deployment because of weather. Vale pointed to the aborted mission. Who recommended cancellation? Keller opened the record. My initials appeared beside the final weather amendment. Vale said nothing. Then Colonel Mercer, the senior intelligence officer, stepped into the command room. General, I need a word. Mercer had spent the morning coordinating the investigation into the Southern Pass explosion. He was also one of the officers who had watched Vale call me useless. He looked at the archive screens, then at me, preferably without Lieutenant Hale present. There it was, the chain of command defending itself. Vale's expression hardened. If this concerns his amendments, he stays. Mercer's eyes narrowed slightly. That choice changed the room more than any apology could have. Vale had just given my presence priority over a colonel's discomfort. Mercer placed a tablet on the table. The issue isn't whether some of his corrections were useful. The issue is that a lieutenant made unauthorized changes to signed operational orders. During final processing, I said. Mercer turned to me. That distinction will matter to an inquiry board. It does not matter to me. He tapped the screen. Here. Operation Northglass. General Vale authorized the Western Bridge. Final field orders used the Eastern Crossing. No secondary command signature approving the change. Vale looked at me. Did you change it? Yes. Why? Weight restriction. Mercer gave a humorless laugh. That restriction was advisory. For empty transports. The convoy was carrying mobile artillery. I pulled the engineering attachment from the archived packet. The load table was still there. The Western Bridge rating was 14 tons below the lead vehicle's field weight. Mercer's expression changed, but only for a second. Then you should have escalated it. I did. I opened the communications log attached to the file. 3 messages. 1 to operations. 1 to engineering. 1 to the duty commander. The first had received no response. Engineering confirmed my calculation 31 minutes later. The duty commander had replied after the convoy was already moving. So I had changed the crossing during final processing. Vale read the timestamps twice. What happened to the Western Bridge? Keller searched the post-operation reports. His face tightened. It was closed 6 days later after a structural inspection. 2 support beams had fractured. Nobody spoke. That was no longer evidence that I had improved paperwork. It was evidence that one of Vale's celebrated operations had avoided a potentially catastrophic crossing because I had refused to let a bad assumption survive long enough to become an accident. Mercer folded his arms. One example does not legalize the process. No, Vale said, but it changes what we're investigating. Mercer looked at him sharply. General, we are no longer asking only why Lieutenant Hale changed my orders. Vale turned toward the archive screens. We are asking why he repeatedly had information my command process failed to put in front of me. I felt the shift immediately. For the first time, I wasn't standing alone on the wrong side of the hierarchy. Vale had stepped into the problem with me. That did not mean I trusted him, but it meant he could no longer pretend the problem was simply my behavior. Keller opened another operation, then another. The pattern became harder to dismiss. A resupply route I had changed after a local road closure. A reconnaissance window moved because thermal conditions made the original timing useless. A medical evacuation plan corrected when the designated landing zone turned out to be outside the helicopter's safe approach angle. Different departments. Different mistakes. Same structural weakness. Information arrived in pieces, and because no single officer owned the gaps between those pieces, the final order could be technically approved while still being operationally wrong. I had been catching the gaps. How did you know where to look? Vale asked. I didn't. 27 times. I read everything attached to the order. Everyone reads the packet. No. Everyone reads their section. I pointed at the screens. Logistics checks logistics. Intelligence checks intelligence. Operations checks timing. I checked whether they agreed with each other. Vale stared at the records. That answer seemed to disturb him more than any individual correction. The problem wasn't that I possessed some secret source of intelligence. The problem was that his command structure rewarded people for staying inside their assigned lanes, and I had spent 3 years quietly crossing between them. Then Keller stopped scrolling. Sir. His voice had changed. You should see Operation Iron Crest. Vale turned. I knew the name before the file opened. Everyone in the command did. Iron Crest was the operation that had made Adrian Vale famous. An extraction completed under impossible weather with 0 fatalities, later taught as an example of decisive command under pressure. Vale's commendation citation hung in the headquarters entrance. Keller opened the original order. The Western Extraction Corridor was highlighted in blue. Then he opened the executed version. The route was different. So was the extraction time. Vale leaned closer. Who authorized that? Keller checked the amendment history. Silence stretched. Then his eyes moved to me. Lieutenant Hale did. My stomach dropped. I remembered Iron Crest, but not like they did. I remembered bad coffee, 6 conflicting reports, and a storm front moving 12 minutes faster than forecast. I remembered changing the route because the Western Corridor would flood before the last vehicles cleared it. I remembered assuming someone above me had approved the amendment after I sent the warning. Apparently, no one had. Vale opened the after-action weather record. The Western Corridor had flooded 19 minutes after the convoy took the eastern route. He read the line again. Then he looked at me with an expression I couldn't name. Not gratitude. Not yet. Something closer to disbelief. If you hadn't changed this, he said, the rear vehicles would have been in the flood zone. Mercer stepped forward. Which makes the unauthorized alteration more serious, not less. Lieutenant Hale changed a general officer's extraction order without confirmed approval. Vale didn't answer him. He was staring at the executed route, then at the commendation report beside it. His commendation report. The document credited his decision to alter the extraction corridor in response to deteriorating weather. I had never read the citation closely enough to notice. Keller did now. His face went pale. Sir, according to the official record, that route change was attributed to you. Vale slowly lifted his eyes to mine. The command room seemed to shrink around us. The Southern Pass failure had raised one question. How many mistakes had I prevented? Iron Crest raised a much worse one. How many of General Adrian Vale's greatest decisions had never actually been his? The first consequence of Iron Crest wasn't an apology. It was an investigation. At 6:42, Colonel Mercer locked my access to the operational network and ordered security to collect every amendment I had touched in the last 3 years. My terminal went black while the Southern Pass convoy was still being extracted. Lieutenant Hale is suspended from final processing pending review, Mercer announced. Effective immediately. Vale looked up from the Iron Crest file. On whose authority? Regulation doesn't require yours when unauthorized alterations to signed orders are discovered. Mercer turned to me. Badge. I unclipped it and placed it on the table. The irony wasn't subtle. 2 hours earlier, I had been useless. Now my work mattered enough to become evidence against me. Vale stepped between Mercer and the archive terminal. He stays in this room. He no longer has clearance. Then I'll show him whatever I decide he needs to see. Mercer's jaw tightened. You may want to consider how that looks, General. Iron Crest is already going to command review. That landed. Vale's commendation wasn't just a framed piece of paper anymore. If the official record credited him for a decision I had made without authorization, the inquiry could damage both of us for opposite reasons. I had crossed the chain of command. He had received credit for the result. Before either man could push further, communications called across the room. Update from the Southern Pass. Recovery has the 3 wounded, but the disabled vehicle can't be moved. We need an alternate extraction route for Second Company. Operations brought up 3 options. I could see the problem immediately. The eastern route was open, but the convoy's fuel plan had been calculated for the shorter Southern Pass. Sending every vehicle east would leave the rear carriers below reserve before they reached the forward depot. I moved toward the table out of habit. Mercer blocked me with one hand. You are suspended. Vale's eyes flicked to the fuel figures. Operations. Major Keller ran the numbers. His face changed. Sir, Eastern extraction leaves 6 carriers under minimum reserve. Can we refuel en route? Nearest tanker group is 48 minutes out. Communications cut in. General, drone reacquired movement on the ridge. 4 heat signatures, moving north. The room tightened. Waiting 48 minutes meant leaving the convoy stationary below people who already appeared to know where the buried charges were. Vale looked at me. Mercer noticed. Don't, he said. Vale ignored him. Hale, what am I missing? The question hit harder this time because everyone heard it. I wasn't allowed to touch the system, so I looked at the wall display instead. Fuel totals. Terrain. Support positions. The medical recovery vehicles. Keller frowned. What about them? They came in from the north. They're lighter and carry emergency fuel bladders for field generators. Keller checked. Not enough to refuel 6 carriers. They don't need full tanks. They need enough reserve to reach the depot. He ran the calculation. 10 seconds later, the screen changed from red to amber. It works. Vale didn't hesitate. Transfer emergency fuel. Route Second Company east in staggered groups. Keep drone coverage on the ridge. Mercer stared at him. You just based a field order on advice from an officer you know altered previous orders without authorization. No, Vale said. I issued an order after considering information my staff missed. It was the first time he had defended the difference. 20 minutes later, the first carrier cleared the pass. Then the second. By 7:31, every trapped soldier was moving east. 3 wounded. No dead. The relief should have felt clean. It didn't. The blast had still happened. Men had still been hurt. And I knew exactly how close we had come to avoiding all of it. Keller quietly placed the original Southern Pass packet beside me. Recon 4's first warning. My red correction slip. Vale's unchanged authorization. You saw both problems, he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Before departure? Yes. Across the room, Vale heard me. His shoulders went rigid. For the first time, the consequence wasn't abstract. He had ordered me not to correct him, and 3 soldiers had been injured after I obeyed. I wanted to feel vindicated. Instead, I saw the medic report on Keller's screen. Fractured wrist, shrapnel wound, concussion. 3 names attached to a lesson I had wanted Vale to learn. The satisfaction disappeared. Mercer returned with security and a printed directive. Lieutenant Hale is to have no further involvement in active operational planning until the inquiry concludes. Vale took the paper. We have an active threat. Then use authorized personnel. Authorized personnel missed the fuel problem 6 minutes ago. That does not give you permission to bypass procedure because you've suddenly decided his insubordination is useful. Vale's expression went cold. And procedure gave me a complete intelligence packet that was 17 minutes out of date. Mercer stepped closer. Be careful, General. If you turn this into an attack on the command system, you may discover the system is less interested in protecting your reputation than you think. There was the real pressure. Not an enemy on a ridge. Not even Mercer himself. A structure built to preserve clear responsibility was now facing evidence that responsibility had been anything but clear. My corrections had produced successful outcomes without formal authority. Vale had received command credit without knowing what had changed underneath him. Exposing one meant exposing the other. Vale handed the suspension directive back. Lieutenant Hale will comply with the investigation, but he remains present as a witness to his own work. Mercer's eyes moved between us. Your choice. He left with security. I expected Vale to say something after the doors closed. He didn't. Instead, he pulled the Iron Crest records back onto the central display. The official commendation credited him with identifying the flood risk and ordering the eastern extraction. The timestamp on my amendment proved I had made the route change 11 minutes before his command log mentioned the weather deterioration. "I didn't know," he said finally. "I know. That doesn't make it better." "No, it didn't." Keller interrupted before the silence could settle. "General, archive search finished." The monitor filled with results. 27 amended operations had become 41. The first search had only captured route and timing changes. The expanded search included logistics attachments, intelligence addenda, weather overrides, evacuation revisions, and resource reallocations. 36 carried my initials or authenticated workstation ID. Vale stared at the number. 36. Keller nodded. "And those are only the amendments the system logged as changes after initial authorization." "What does that mean?" "Some corrections would have been incorporated before the order was formally generated. They wouldn't appear as amendments at all." Vale looked at me. Suddenly, even I didn't know how many there had been. Keller opened the performance summaries for the 36 confirmed cases. 33 successful operations. 2 modified before execution. 1 aborted safely. No mission failures. Then he opened the comparison set. Operations from periods when I had been on leave, reassigned, or otherwise absent from final processing. The failure rate wasn't catastrophic, but it was higher. Delays. Resource conflicts. 2 avoidable route reversals. 1 evacuation that had required emergency resupply. Vale moved closer to the screen. We were almost looking at the answer now. Almost. Then Keller found another filter. "Sir, there are 7 operations marked exceptional command decisions where Lieutenant Hale's amendments materially changed execution." Vale's face tightened. "Including Iron Crest?" "Yes." "Open them." 6 files appeared immediately. The 7th required restricted authorization. Vale entered his credentials. The file unlocked. I recognized the operation name and felt my stomach turn before I even saw the order. Operation Black Harbor. 2 years earlier. A night extraction. 46 soldiers. Officially, another flawless decision credited to General Vale. But the amendment history showed something neither of us expected. My red correction was there. So was a second change made 11 minutes later, one I had never seen, signed with Vale's command authorization. He looked at me. "You made the first change?" "Yes." "And the second?" "No." Vale opened the second amendment. It reversed part of my correction, then restored it through a different route designation. Someone had seen what I changed, understood why it mattered, and quietly rebuilt the order around it before Vale ever received the final outcome. Keller checked the access record. His face lost color. "General, this wasn't Lieutenant Hale working alone." Vale's eyes stayed on the screen. For hours, we had thought we were uncovering the hidden history of my corrections. Black Harbor suggested something much bigger. Someone else inside his command had known those corrections mattered and had been building them into his victories without ever telling either of us. The access record on Black Harbor changed everything because the Second Amendment had not been made by another hidden strategist. It had been made by Colonel Mercer. Keller enlarged the authorization trail, and for a few seconds no one spoke. Mercer's command credential had opened the file 11 minutes after my correction. He had reversed my route change, then rebuilt the order so the convoy still used the safer eastern approach without preserving my amendment as the reason. Vale stared at the screen. He knew. Keller swallowed. At least on Black Harbor. I felt something colder than anger settle into place. Until that moment, I had believed the story was simple. I had been crossing gaps no one else saw. Vale had benefited without knowing. The system had failed because everyone stayed inside their own lane. Black Harbor proved someone inside that system had seen exactly what I was doing, and instead of stopping it, had learned how to hide it. "Pull Mercer's access history against every one of my amendments," I said. Keller hesitated, then looked at Vale. Vale nodded once. "Do it." The first match appeared in less than a minute. Then another. Then 9 more. Mercer had accessed 14 of the 36 confirmed operations within an hour of my changes. In 7 cases, he made no edits. In 4, he added supporting documentation after the fact. In 3, he restructured the order so my correction remained in effect, but no longer appeared as an unauthorized alteration. Vale's face went rigid. Why would he do that? Keller answered before I could. Because if Lieutenant Hale's changes worked, the mission succeeded. If the amendments remained visible, Command had to explain why a junior officer was altering signed orders. The implication was worse than the evidence. Mercer had not been correcting the system. He had been protecting it from the fact that it needed correcting. Vale turned toward the door Mercer had walked through 20 minutes earlier. Find him. Security located him in the legal review office downstairs. Vale ordered him back to command. Mercer arrived 7 minutes later, saw the Black Harbor file on the central display, and stopped walking. That was all the confirmation I needed. You knew, Vale said. Mercer didn't pretend not to understand. I knew Hale had a habit of exceeding his role. That isn't what I asked. Then ask the question you actually want answered. Vale stepped closer. Did you know his changes were preventing failures? Mercer looked at me, not Vale. Sometimes. 14 operations, Keller said. You accessed 14 amended files immediately after his changes. Mercer's jaw tightened. Because someone had to make sure his improvisation didn't create a legal disaster. So you preserved the changes. When they were sound. Vale gave a short, disbelieving laugh. You preserved them and erased the fact that he made them. I normalized the documentation. You buried the source. Mercer's expression hardened. I protected the chain of command. There it was. Not corruption. Not sabotage. Something more dangerous because it sounded reasonable. Mercer pointed at the archive display. Do you understand what happens when field units believe a lieutenant in final processing can override a general officer because he thinks he sees something everyone else missed? The entire command structure becomes negotiable. I finally spoke. So instead you let the general believe the corrected decisions were his. Mercer looked at me. The decisions were his. You supplied information. I changed routes. You changed inputs. I changed execution. His silence lasted half a second too long. Vale noticed. How many, he asked. Mercer didn't answer. How many of my operations did you quietly rebuild around Hale's corrections? Enough to know the arrangement worked. The room seemed to contract. Arrangement. That word changed the shape of the last 3 years. I had thought I was getting away with crossing lines because no one paid attention. In reality, at least one senior officer had been watching closely enough to decide which of my corrections deserved to survive, and then laundering them back into the command process so no one had to confront what that meant. You could have told me, Vale said. Mercer's voice stayed flat. And then what? Promote him into operations? Rewrite review authority? Admit that your staff structure was missing cross-functional conflicts a lieutenant was catching by instinct? You would have had an institutional fight on your hands every week. Vale said nothing. Mercer continued. Instead, Hale did what he was good at. You did what you were good at. Mission succeeded. And he got called useless, Vale said. That landed harder than anything else Mercer had said. Mercer's eyes shifted toward me. For the first time, there was something like discomfort there. That was not part of the process. No, I said. That was the part where the process worked too well. Vale looked back at the archive. The victories. The commendations. The flawless reports. Suddenly, they weren't proof that he had always been right. They were proof that the system had been quietly correcting him before reality could. And I understood something about myself at the same time. I had spent years believing that if I kept saving the outcome, eventually the work would speak for me. But every time I fixed something silently, I made it easier for everyone above me to believe nothing needed fixing at all. Mercer had exploited that. Vale had benefited from it. And I had helped sustain it. Show me everything, Vale said. Mercer's face changed. General, every operation. Every amendment you normalized. Every time Hale changed execution and you preserved the result. That review will not stay internal. Good. Mercer stared at him. You may lose command authority over this. Vale glanced at me, then back at Mercer. Maybe I should know what that authority was built on. That was the moment the balance between us changed completely. Not because Vale trusted me yet. Because for the first time, he was willing to endanger his own reputation to uncover what my work had actually been carrying. Mercer left under orders to release the full archive. 30 minutes later, the first batch arrived. It was worse than any of us expected. My corrections did not cluster around a few lucky missions. They touched route planning, weather windows, evacuation timing, fuel reserves, intelligence conflicts, and deployment sequencing across 2 years. In 12 major operations, the final successful execution depended on changes I had introduced before the order reached the field. In 5 of those, Mercer had formally reconstructed the paperwork afterward. Vale read the summary twice. 12. Keller nodded. Materially dependent. The old question was finally answered. Vale's record had not survived because I occasionally caught mistakes. A measurable part of his reputation for near-flawless judgment existed because I had been acting as an invisible second layer of command analysis. But the answer opened a worse question. Vale turned to me. Come back to final processing. Once, those words would have been everything I wanted. Recognition. Need. Proof that I mattered. Now they sounded different. He wasn't asking me to become visible. He was asking me to return to the same function now that he understood its value. I looked at the red-marked orders filling the screen, then at the 3 wounded names still open on the medical report. No, Vale froze. No, I'm not going back to fixing your decisions in silence. His expression tightened, but he didn't interrupt. If my judgment matters, I said, then it carries my name, my authority, and my responsibility. I'm done being useful only after everyone else gets to pretend they were right. For the first time since this began, I wasn't trying to prove my worth to him. I was deciding what my worth would cost. And that changed the problem completely. Because Vale no longer needed to figure out whether I had been useful. He needed to decide whether he could trust me enough to share the power he had spent years protecting, and whether his command could survive the truth if he did. My refusal had consequences before Vale could answer it. At 8:14, his command authorization dropped from unrestricted to provisional. The notice appeared on the central display while we were still standing over the archive files. Effective immediately, any operational order involving route changes, deployment timing, or intelligence overrides required a second senior signature. Mercer had adapted faster than either of us expected. He hadn't tried to bury the evidence again. He had sent it upward. Command Review accepted his recommendation, Keller said. Pending investigation, they're restricting your unilateral authority. Vale read the notice without moving. 6 hours earlier, no one in that room would have questioned his signature. Now one signature wasn't enough. And Hale, he asked. Keller looked at me. Suspension stands. No access to active planning systems. Vale almost laughed. So they've restricted the officer who gave the orders and removed the officer who kept catching the gaps. That appears to be the current solution. I should have enjoyed the absurdity. I didn't. The Southern Pass attack had already proved reality didn't wait for review boards. As if to make the point, communications called out. General, Recon 4 has movement again. A drone image replaced the archive screen. The figures from the ridge were gone, but a reconnaissance team had found fresh tire tracks north of the pass and fragments of a remote trigger near the blast site. The buried charge had been deliberate. They were watching the convoy, Keller said, and they knew where it would be. Vale's attention snapped to the route records. How widely was the Southern Pass order distributed? Standard operational list. Command, logistics, intelligence, forward coordination. The problem had changed again. We were no longer just cleaning up a bad order. Someone had exploited it. Vale turned to me automatically, then stopped himself. That hesitation mattered. Before, he would have either dismissed me or used me. Now he seemed to understand that asking for my judgment while denying me any authority was exactly the arrangement I had just refused. What do you need? He asked. Not what do you see? Not fix this. What do you need? Access to the same information everyone making the decision has. Keller looked toward my dead terminal. Command Review explicitly suspended him. Vale removed his own access token and placed it beside the central workstation. Then he works through me. General, Keller warned. That could be interpreted as circumventing the suspension. He doesn't touch the system. I do. He advises me, and I own every decision I make from that advice. I looked at Vale. That's still not what I asked for. I know. He met my eyes. It's what I can give you today without getting both of us removed before noon. That was different. Not equality. Not yet. But for once, he wasn't pretending a temporary compromise was respect. I stepped to the display. Show me distribution timestamps. Vale entered the command himself. The Southern Pass order had reached forward coordination at 2:24, less than 10 minutes after I transmitted it. The first confirmed hostile movement near the ridge had been logged at 4:58. Plenty of time to place observers. But the explosive itself bothered me. Recon 4 had detected metallic anomalies before the final order went out. If the charge was already there, I said, they didn't plant it because of Vale's route. Keller nodded. Then they predicted the route. Or they prepared more than one. Vale pulled up Recon 4's original anomaly map. 3 metallic signatures along the Southern Pass. Only one had detonated. Then he overlaid the eastern approach, the route I had recommended. Recon 4 had never scanned it. A cold silence settled over the room. The route I believed would have saved the convoy might have been safe. Or it might have contained a second trap we simply hadn't found. For the first time that morning, my correction wasn't automatically the better answer. Vale looked at me. Would you still have sent them east? I hated the question because I couldn't hide behind hindsight. With what we knew at 2:18. Yes. And now? Now I'd stop pretending one route choice solves the problem. Something shifted in his expression. Approval. Maybe. but without the old relief of handing the problem to me. Then what's the objective? Find out what they're predicting. Keller brought up the last 6 convoy movements in the sector. I couldn't search them myself, so Vale worked the terminal while I called comparisons. Route selection, timing, fuel constraints, terrain, threat reports. The first 3 showed nothing. The fourth did. 2 weeks earlier, a patrol had changed course after a bridge closure. Unknown observers appeared near the alternate route 20 minutes before the patrol arrived. No contact. It had been dismissed as civilian movement. The 5th mission had a similar anomaly. A supply convoy rerouted because of flooding, followed by a communications disruption along the new path. They're not predicting our first choice, I said. They're watching how we react when the first choice becomes unavailable. Vale leaned closer. They're learning our correction process. The words landed hard. For years, I had treated correction as protection. Find the flaw. Choose the safer option. Move. But an enemy watching long enough could learn that behavior too. The antagonistic force wasn't just exploiting Vale's mistakes. It was exploiting our need to fix them predictably. Keller opened the 6th operation. This one had no incident report. Vale had changed the route after a weather warning, exactly as procedure required. The alternate route had been clean. So the pattern isn't complete, Keller said. No, I replied. Which makes it worse. We don't know what they can actually see. A secure call interrupted us. Command review. Vale answered on speaker. Mercer's voice came through first. General, given the possibility of hostile exploitation, review is accelerating the transfer of sector planning authority. Vale's face hardened. To whom? Temporary joint control under Colonel Mercer and regional operations. There was the adaptation. Mercer no longer needed to argue that my corrections were insubordination. He could argue that Vale's command process was compromised. And this time, he had evidence. Effective when? Vale asked. 1000. Less than 90 minutes. You're removing command authority during an active threat investigation. We are distributing it, Mercer said. The exact thing you now claim should have happened earlier. Vale went silent. Mercer had found the perfect weapon, our own discovery. When the call ended, Vale looked at the clock, then at me. 90 minutes. For what? To figure out what they're exploiting before I lose the authority to act on it. I shook my head. That's your objective. His expression tightened. What's yours? I looked at the dead terminal that had once been my entire place in his command. Then at the archive proving how much damage that place had hidden. I want a decision process where the person expected to catch the risk also has the authority to challenge the choice before it becomes an order. Vale nodded slowly. Then help me build one. Not in secret. Not in secret. Before I could answer, Keller swore at the tactical display. A new movement order had just entered the regional queue under Mercer's temporary review authority. Another convoy. Medical supplies and replacement personnel. Departure in 70 minutes. Its primary route crossed the northern corridor. Its contingency route, automatically generated if the northern road became unavailable, ran east. The same alternate approach I had recommended that morning. Vale read the order once. Then he looked at me. They're about to send another convoy into a route we haven't scanned. And this time, neither of us had the authority to simply correct it. The new convoy order gave us 68 minutes to solve a problem we were no longer authorized to touch, and Mercer made sure it stayed that way. At 8:43, security entered the command room with a written restriction. Vale could observe the convoy, but could not alter its route without Mercer's approval, and I was barred from communicating with any field unit. This is active operational containment, the security captain said. Any unauthorized transmission will trigger immediate removal. Vale took the directive. Colonel Mercer approved a contingency route that hasn't been scanned. Then raise it through review. I did. And Vale's expression told me the answer before he spoke. Denied. They consider the Eastern Corridor lower risk than delaying medical supplies. On the tactical display, 32 vehicles were preparing to move. Medical trucks, replacement personnel, fuel support. 146 people following an order generated by the same system we had spent all morning proving could miss the spaces between departments. But this time the danger wasn't a flaw I could circle in red. We didn't know the eastern route was trapped. We only knew we didn't know. Then the northern road, the convoy's primary route, went dark. Not physically, electronically. 3 surveillance sensors stopped reporting within 11 seconds of each other. Keller pulled up the diagnostic feed. Power failure? No, I said. Too clean. A 4th sensor vanished. Communications tried the forward checkpoint. Static. Mercer's voice came over the secure channel 30 seconds later. Convoy will shift to contingency route east at departure unless northern communications are restored. They'll hit the transmit key. That may be exactly what they want. Or it may be a communications fault. For sensors, we do not cancel critical movement every time equipment fails. Then delay and scan the east corridor. Drone assets are supporting the Southern Pass investigation. Vale glanced at the countdown. 54 minutes. Reassign one. Mercer's answer came immediately. Denied. He wasn't hiding anything now. He was enforcing a process designed to prevent one commander from improvising during an investigation. Under normal circumstances, that might have been responsible. Under these circumstances, it meant the system was actively pushing the convoy toward the one route an unknown enemy might expect us to choose. I moved closer to the map. Show me every disruption before the previous alternate route incidents. Keller started typing, then stopped when security looked at him. Vale stepped to the terminal instead. I'm reviewing historical records. That remains within my authority. The captain didn't object. We pulled the 6 earlier missions. Flooding, bridge closure, communications loss, road obstruction. Each event had forced a route change. Different causes, same effect. Then I saw the detail we had missed. Timing. Bill looked at me. What? The disruptions happen after the movement order is distributed. Keller checked. Everyone did. 11 minutes after distribution. 23, 17, 9. The enemy didn't need access to our final route decision. They only needed to know the available contingencies and create a reason for us to select one. Vale's face hardened. They're not predicting our correction process. They're triggering it. That was the answer we had been circling since the Southern Pass explosion. The antagonistic force wasn't waiting for our mistakes. It was manufacturing conditions that made our safest-looking response predictable. And right now, someone had just blinded the northern corridor minutes after receiving, or observing, the new movement pattern. We need to know whether Route East is compromised, Vale said. Keller pointed at the drone allocation. No aerial asset available for 31 minutes. Ground reconnaissance? Too slow. I studied the terrain. East looked safer because it offered more maneuvering room than the Southern Pass. That also meant more possible approaches, more places to hide, more uncertainty. There was one way to test it quickly, but I hated it before I said it. Send an unmanned engineering crawler ahead. Vale shook his head. Range. Keller checked inventory. We have one at Forward Depot 6. 20 minutes from the eastern entry point, if remotely deployed now. Do it. Security interrupted. General, you cannot redirect field equipment into an active operation. Vale turned. Then contact Mercer. The answer came 4 minutes later. Denied. The crawler was reserved for Southern Pass clearance. Vale slammed his palm against the table. He is protecting procedure while a convoy drives blind. He's protecting command integrity, I said. Vale looked at me sharply. You're defending him? No. I'm telling you why yelling won't change his decision. That stopped him. Then what will? I looked at the convoy clock. 37 minutes. Evidence. We needed something strong enough that Mercer couldn't classify it as speculation. Keller pulled the sensor logs from the northern corridor. The 4 failures weren't identical. 3 had lost communications. 1 was still powered but transmitting nothing. Can we access its local diagnostic buffer? I asked. Vale worked through the maintenance interface. A short data burst appeared. 11 seconds before the sensor went offline, it had registered a narrowband interference spike. Keller compared the frequency to the communications disruption from the earlier supply convoy. Match. Not similar. Match. Vale immediately sent it to Mercer. This time the silence lasted longer. Then Mercer came on the line. Convoy departure delayed 15 minutes. No route change authorized. It wasn't enough, but it was the first concession. More important, Mercer redirected a reconnaissance drone toward the eastern corridor. 22 minutes later, the first images arrived. Nothing. Empty road. Tree line. Drainage cuts. No visible movement. Mercer came back on. Route East remains contingency. Convoy departs in 9 minutes. Bill looked at me. You still think it's a trap? I think they wanted us to choose it. That isn't the same thing. I know. And that was the hardest part. I could no longer be the man who always had the correction in red ink. We had evidence of manipulation, but not proof of what came next. If I demanded the convoy stop, and I was wrong, medical supplies and replacements would be delayed during an active threat. If I let it move, and I was right, 146 people could enter a prepared kill zone. Vale seemed to understand exactly what was happening in my head. What would you order, he asked. Not what should I change. Not what did I miss. What would you order? The question carried everything I had demanded from him. Authority, responsibility, Consequence. Before I could answer, Keller leaned toward the drone feed. Hold on. He magnified a section of road 2 miles inside the eastern corridor. At first I saw nothing. Then the image shifted to thermal. 3 narrow cold patches cut across sun-warmed pavement. Freshly disturbed ground. The same spacing pattern Recon 4 had recorded in the southern pass. Keller whispered, possible buried charges. Vale reached for the secure channel. Mercer answered immediately. We see it. Route east is closed. Relief lasted less than 5 seconds. Convoy will revert north. Mercer continued. I looked at the dead sensor corridor. No, Vale turned to me. Why? A new transmission broke through from the northern checkpoint, weak and distorted. Command, checkpoint north 2. We have movement near the relay station. Multiple vehicles, no identification. Then gunfire cracked over the channel. The transmission died. The tactical map changed red. East was potentially mined. North was under active contact. South was blocked. The convoy had 7 minutes until its medical cargo became operationally urgent, and every planned route was now compromised. Mercer's voice came over the speaker, no longer controlled. General Vale, recommend immediate action. Vale didn't answer. He looked at me instead. The room did too. For 3 years, I had been the person who corrected choices after someone else made them. Now there was no correct route waiting to be found, no hidden report that could solve this, and no senior officer left pretending certainty. Vale removed his command token from around his neck and placed it in front of me. You wanted responsibility with authority, he said. Tell me what you would order, Hale. I left Vale's command token on the table. I don't need your credentials, I said. I need you to put my recommendation on the command channel under my name. His eyes held mine for half a second. Then he keyed the transmitter. All stations, Lieutenant Hale is assuming tactical planning authority for Convoy 12 under my command authorization. His recommendations are to be treated as mine until formally superseded. Mercer cut in immediately. General, you do not have authority to delegate command to a suspended lieutenant. Then relieve me after we get 146 people out of this box. I stepped to the map. East was mined. North was under attack. South was blocked. So I stopped looking for a safe road. Convoy 12, do not depart. The convoy commander answered. Holding. Keller, how many vehicles are essential to the medical mission? He checked the manifest. 11. For medical trucks, 3 personnel carriers, 2 fuelers, 2 support vehicles. Split them from the convoy. Keep everything else inside the secured staging area. Vale understood first. A smaller column. Not a column. I pointed to the terrain west of the staging base. There's an old firebreak running toward the rail service line. Keller shook his head. It isn't rated as a military route. Exactly. It isn't in the contingency plan. That was the point. Whoever had manipulated our movements knew our approved choices. Every time one route failed, procedure pushed us toward another predictable route. I wasn't going to choose from their menu. Can those 11 vehicles cross the firebreak? Keller pulled engineering data. Medical trucks can. Personnel carriers probably. Fuelers are the problem. Leave the fuelers. Then they can't complete the mission. Transfer fuel into the support vehicles and carry only what gets the medical package to forward station 6. Keller started calculating. Mercer's voice cut through the room. Hale, you are proposing an unscouted off-road movement based on incomplete terrain data. Yes. That is not a plan. That is gambling. I looked at the 3 red routes on the display. No. Sending them where someone has already prepared for us is gambling. Vale said nothing. He was letting the argument be mine. That mattered more than his token ever could. Keller finished the calculation. It works, but barely. They'll arrive below normal reserve. Normal reserve is irrelevant if normal procedure is compromised. Mercer came back hard. General Vale, terminate this now. Vale finally answered. Do you have a safe authorized route? Silence. Then Lieutenant Hale continues. There it was. The trust question answered when it actually cost him something. Not when my correction was proven right afterward. Now, while I could still be wrong, we transferred fuel, stripped the convoy to 11 vehicles, and sent 2 unmanned utility carts down different approved approaches. One toward east, one north. If someone was watching our standard responses, I wanted to give them something familiar to watch. Medical group moving, communications said. 11 markers left the staging area and turned west onto ground no convoy order had designated. 3 minutes later, the eastern utility cart disappeared from telemetry. Keller stared at the screen. Signal loss. Then the drone feed flashed white. A detonation tore across Route East exactly where the disturbed pavement had appeared. Nobody celebrated. We had confirmed the trap by sending an empty machine into it, but the people responsible now knew we weren't coming. Movement near eastern tree line. Intelligence called. 2 vehicles pulling away north. Track them, I said. Do not engage unless they threaten the medical group. Mercer objected. They may be the hostile element we've been looking for, and chasing them is exactly how we lose focus again. Our objective is the convoy. That decision hurt. For hours, I had wanted to know who was manipulating us, but catching them wasn't worth turning 146 people into bait. At the northern corridor, the gunfire stopped. The unidentified vehicles near the relay station withdrew almost simultaneously. Keller looked at me. They were trying to pull us north, or keep north closed long enough to force east. Either way, the pattern was breaking. We had stopped reacting the way they expected. Then the medical group reached the steepest section of the firebreak. 1 personnel carrier bogged down. Speed dropped to 0. Vehicle 7 immobilized. Communications reported. Rear axle buried. My stomach tightened. Mercer didn't need to say anything. This was the consequence of my choice, under my name. Can they tow? Support 9 can try, but they'll lose at least 10 minutes. Forward Station 6 had already reported that its trauma supplies were below emergency minimum. Delay mattered. I looked at the manifest. Move the replacement personnel out of 7. Distribute them across the support vehicles. Leave the carrier. The convoy commander hesitated. Lieutenant, that vehicle is operational equipment. People and medical cargo are the mission. The carrier isn't. Vale glanced at me, and something changed in his expression. I had spent years preserving orders by fixing every flaw I could find. Now I was accepting a loss instead of pretending a perfect outcome existed. Execute, he said. They abandoned the carrier. 7 minutes later, the medical group reached the rail service line. From there, the terrain opened toward Forward Station 6. The drone tracked them continuously. No explosives. No hostile movement. At 9:57, communications called the update we had been waiting for. Medical group has reached Station 6. All personnel accounted for. The room exhaled at once. I didn't. Not yet. And the remaining convoy. Secure at staging. No casualties. Only then did I step back from the map. The Southern Pass wounded were alive. Convoy 12 was safe. The medical supplies had arrived. We had lost 1 carrier and exposed 2 prepared disruptions without sending soldiers into either. Not perfect. Real. Mercer's voice returned over the command channel, quieter now. General Vale, Regional Operations confirms the eastern detonation and northern diversion appear coordinated. We're freezing automated contingency routing across the sector. The system that had spent the morning defending itself was finally changing because it could no longer deny the evidence. Vale looked at the archive screen, then at me. You were right. I shook my head. About what? The eastern route. We proved east was trapped. That doesn't prove the firebreak was the best option. It got them through. And cost us a carrier. No casualties. Because we made choices with incomplete information and accepted the consequences. Vale went quiet. I realized he understood what I was telling him. The lesson wasn't that I was always right, and he was always wrong. That would only build a new version of the same broken system. The lesson was that judgment needed challenge, ownership, and visible responsibility before the order went out, not secret corrections afterward. Security entered the room again at 10:03. This time they didn't come for me. The captain approached Vale. Command Review has suspended the transfer of sector authority pending emergency reassessment. Mercer had lost control of the immediate process. Vale hadn't exactly won it back either. Everything was under review now, as it should have been. Vale looked at the red correction slip still lying beside the Southern Pass order. Hours ago, it had been evidence that I could see what he missed. Now it looked like evidence of something neither of us wanted to return to. He picked it up, folded it carefully, and handed it to me. I'm not asking you to correct my orders anymore. I took the paper. Good. I'm asking you to help decide them. The command room went silent again, just as it had when he called me useless. But this silence felt completely different. The battle over whether my judgment mattered was finished. What remained was harder. What Vale would do about the victories credited to him, the system that had hidden me inside them, and the insult everyone in that room had heard before the truth came out. By noon, the order that had nearly destroyed Vale's command had become the document that forced it to change. Command Review froze automated contingency routing across the sector, restored Vale's operational authority under temporary joint review, and lifted my suspension long enough for me to testify about the 36 confirmed amendments. But Vale made one decision before anyone ordered him to. He called every officer who had been in the command room that morning back to the map table. Mercer stood near the far end. Keller stayed beside operations. I took the same position where I had been standing when Vale called me useless. The Southern Pass order was still there. So was my folded correction slip. Vale placed both in the center of the table. This morning, I told Lieutenant Hale that his corrections were interference, he said. No one moved. I called him useless. Then I ordered him to stop doing the work that had been protecting this command from gaps I did not know existed. He didn't soften it. He didn't say we had misunderstood each other. He didn't blame pressure. 3 soldiers were injured after I dismissed information he had already identified. That responsibility is mine. Mercer shifted slightly. Vale continued before anyone could interrupt. But that is not the only record that needs correcting. Keller brought up Iron Crest. The commendation citation appeared beside the original order, my amendment, and the weather report showing the western corridor flooding 19 minutes later. Vale looked at the citation for several seconds. This credits me with recognizing the flood risk and changing the extraction route. I did not make that decision. Lieutenant Hale did. Hearing him say it publicly felt strange. For years, I had imagined recognition would feel like winning something back. Instead, I mostly felt the weight of how long I had accepted being invisible. Vale opened Black Harbor next. Then the other operations where my changes had materially altered execution. I have requested formal correction of the records, he said. Not because every successful decision was Hale's. They weren't. And not because every correction he made was automatically right. It wasn't. He looked at me. But the record will show who made the decisions that changed outcomes. That mattered more than an apology. He wasn't replacing one myth with another. He wasn't turning me into the infallible lieutenant who had secretly commanded everything. He was finally putting responsibility where it belonged. Mercer spoke from the end of the table. And the unauthorized amendments. They stay in the record too, I said. Everyone looked at me. I unfolded the red correction slip. I made them. I'll answer for them. Vale's eyes narrowed slightly, but I kept going. If we erase that part because the outcomes were good, we repeat the same mistake. The problem was never just that I wasn't getting credit. The problem was that decisions were being made without clear ownership. Mercer studied me for a moment, then gave one small nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It didn't need to be. The inquiry would decide what happened to him, to Vale, and to me. But the hiding was finished. 3 days later, the first structural change took effect. Final operational review no longer belonged to one department checking whether its own section was complete. A cross-functional challenge review was required before major movement orders, with named officers responsible for identifying conflicts between intelligence, logistics, engineering, and operations. My name was on the first temporary roster, not as a processor, as a planning officer. When Keller handed me the authorization, I read it twice. You're allowed to disagree professionally now, he said. Try not to enjoy it too much. No promises. It was the first time either of us had laughed since the explosion. The 3 soldiers injured at the Southern Pass recovered. One returned to duty within days. The soldier with the shrapnel wound needed surgery, but was expected to make a full recovery. I visited them because I needed to see the consequence without turning it into a lesson about myself. I didn't tell them I had seen the route problem beforehand. I didn't need them to absolve me. I had obeyed an order I knew was wrong because part of me wanted someone else to finally experience the cost of ignoring me. I could admit that without pretending the explosion was mine to carry alone. That was the difference I hadn't understood before. Responsibility wasn't the same thing as taking every failure into myself. A week later, Vale found me in the planning room after most of the night staff had gone. A new movement order lay between us. No crisis. No trapped convoy. Just an ordinary resupply mission, which somehow made the moment more important. I had a red pen in my hand. Old habit. Vale noticed it. You know, he said. I considered banning those. I looked at him. The pens. Specifically yours. That sounds like an abuse of command authority. I'm learning. There was almost a smile there. Almost. Then his expression changed. I owe you more than the corrected records. I waited. I kept thinking the worst thing I did was fail to recognize your competence. He shook his head. It wasn't. The worst thing was creating a command where you thought the only way to matter was to make yourself invisible. That one found the place the public apology hadn't. The old place. The 17-year-old who fixed the books and learned not to mention it. The young officer who caught discrepancies and learned that being useful was safer than being noticed. The lieutenant who spent 3 years leaving red marks on other people's decisions and then disappearing before anyone asked who made them. You didn't create all of that, I said. No, Vale's voice was quiet, but I benefited from it. I looked down at the order. For once, I didn't feel the need to rescue him from the discomfort of that truth. Then don't benefit from it again. I won't. He pushed the document toward me. Not after signing it. Before. My red pen hovered over the page, but I didn't start correcting. There's a timing conflict with the fuel transfer, I said. Vale pulled his chair closer instead of reaching for the order. Show me. I pointed to the two schedules. He asked why I thought they conflicted. I explained. He challenged one assumption. I checked it and realized he was right. Then I found a second issue he had missed. We changed the timing together, and when the final order was generated, both our names appeared in the review history. Two names. Visible responsibility. It was such a small thing compared with Iron Crest or the Southern Pass, but that was why I knew the change was real. Trust wasn't what happened when the stakes were high enough to force humility. Trust was what remained when nobody was watching. Vale stood to leave, then stopped at the door. Hale. Sir. He glanced at the red pen still resting beside my hand. Months ago, I would have waited for the instruction. Fix it. Process it. Stay in your lane. Instead, the Alpha General looked back at the order between us and asked the question I had spent 3 years wishing someone would ask before the damage was done. What am I missing?